This is Craig and Andrew, two Ranger qualified Army officers with MBAs, here to help you improve your business through leadership.
Each week, we'll deliver easy lessons from the battlefield to the boardroom on how to improve team performance. If you're a leader or want to be, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the Cohort.
Disclaimer: the views of this podcast are those of the authors alone and do not represent the views of the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Command Post Cohort. Today, we're going to talk about change management. We're going to discuss why some organizations are better at change than others, and then what are some things we can do as leaders to help our team through change, because that can sometimes be a difficult and stressful time.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Change is constant, right? But it is often a difficult experience for people and organizations. So I think this is a good topic.
I think it's interesting that, we talk about how change is constant and it involves everybody. I don't know any business or organization who has ever not dealt with change.
Yeah.
At some point, everybody is going to deal with change, whether it's a minor adjustment to a business plan or something, an entire restructuring of a business. But, we deal with change so much, even when we think about technology and how things have changed. There's no farmers. I shouldn't say no. There's few farmers at a commercial level plowing fields with animals right now. There's very few people who are handwriting books right now.
Yeah.
So technology also affects us, even if, our business plan stays the same. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah, Craig, you're spot on. We could do probably 8 more podcasts just about, the acceptance of technology, right? And improving those systems and changing to adapt and include new technologies, right? But we don't have that kind of time this morning.
Yeah.
We'll try and narrow it down some to some more actionable tactical tips.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because coming from the military where change was widely accepted and almost expected, because, most people are going to be actually packing up their house and moving approximately every 3 years.
Yep.
And you're going to a new unit, a different organization. So you're having to learn new standard procedures, new personnel. So it's more difficult to become complacent. It does happen. It's still, you'd be amazed how complacent somebody can get in 3 years. But it is, I think, more of a lifestyle of the military of accepting that change.
Yeah.
And so one thing I've noticed since getting out is some of the companies I work for, when the discussion of change comes up, it's not just the normal human resistance to, change is scary, but there is a very deep-rooted resistance because some of these individuals and organizations may have been operating in this other way for, sometimes 20, 30 years. And so when you come in and say, hey, Craig, check it out. I know you've been doing it this way for 25 years, but now instead of using the typewriter, here is the computer or what have you. And I know that's kind of an outdated example, but I think it's still relevant.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. A point I often think about is taxis in the current day, right?
Yeah.
Taxis largely are still going by the old model, right? You call up the taxi company on a phone. They have to find the number.
Yeah.
And then you call them and they'll show up. Or if you're at the airport, then there they are. Or I could just click this button on my Lyft app on my phone and a car will show up where I am.
Yeah.
So why didn't taxis adopt an app platform? I don't know. It's not really the topic of the day, but you have to change with the times to be able to stay with or ahead of the competition.
Yeah, I like that example. I think that it is interesting because there are certain locations to where taxis are still, have a fairly strong presence, even alongside other rideshare apps. You got Uber and Lyft and everything else going on. And then I'm like you, I wonder, it's like, why is somebody taking the time to make a phone call? Like, I just pressed a few buttons on my way down to the lobby, and now all of a sudden a car magically appears at the hotel to take me wherever I'm going. And to me, it's easier, but for some reason, they're still doing well in places.
Talking about why so adapting to change and changing all the time is so commonplace in the Army. You're right. Because we have to, right? We move every 3 years. But really, I think it's more easily understood because ultimately in the military, everything comes down to life or death.
Yeah.
Right. And that takes it to the extreme, right? But we know we have to be good at our craft in order to operate effectively and come back home. Right.
Yeah.
Now, in the business sense, clearly that's not the case. However, I can liken it to being with the market, right? You can continue to sell whatever product it is, but if the market moves away from wanting that product, you've got to change, right? You can't continue to sell something that nobody's buying.
Absolutely.
So, think about Stanley, right?
Yeah.
Think whatever you want about their cups, right? They said, oh, well, for these construction workers, we'll make these thermoses, these big, green, ugly thermoses.
Yeah.
They'll work great. Well,
Yeah.
we're selling those. Great. Somebody had an idea.
Yeah, they did.
And somebody allowed that change to happen. They found a niche in the market, and now they sell these big cups with big handles, and they sell a lot of them.
Absolutely.
So they changed, right, to adapt to the market to continue to sell that product. And now you say Stanley, many more people are going to know that brand, that logo. So it may not be life and death, but it can be a going concern for different companies, right? If you're continuing selling a product that nobody's buying, you're not going to be in business very long.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's interesting, when we look at how the military is set up to face those life and death decisions on a regular basis, and that's kind of common terminology and practice for us. And so I think we focus on different things, or we get used to that at least, to only focus on the important. And if it's not that important, if it's not going to affect life or death, and we just we can brush that off pretty easily. Some small discomfort or something that's just kind of subjective. And I always think back to the old Allen Iverson press conference talking about practice. He went on for a while after he was asked about his attendance at practice of, we're not talking about a game. We're not talking about a championship. We're just talking about practice. And so a lot of times when I see organizations getting caught up in the weeds about stuff that doesn't matter, it's like, let's not talk about practice. Let's actually focus on what is the life and death of this business. Because like you said, those new products, that's no different than, as the military evolves into new weaponry, new technology. Yeah. It's the same thing. We talk a lot about these ideas being principle based, but your organization, there is a chance it can be placed out of the market. Even a successful business, Blockbuster, what happened? They didn't want to adapt. They didn't want to change. Netflix offered to sell to them, and they said, no, we're Blockbuster. We know what we're doing. We've been doing it this way for 20 years. And what happened is they were not prepared for that change, refused to do it. And I shouldn't say they refused. They were actually trying to do something similar to Netflix at the time. But I think their culture did not allow them to do that rapidly enough.
Yeah.
And, then you have a business that dies.
Yeah. So what comes to my mind, is two things. You have to describe and know why there is a need to change, right? If you as a leader, if you can understand why there's a need to change and foresee that change, that's like step one, right? Understanding that there's a need for change and be willing to accept that there is a need to change. those two things, then you have to be able to, if you as a leader accept it,
yeah,
and can understand it and foresee it, then you're better able to guide the organization through it. Then I think you're less likely to, like you said, get caught up in the weeds.
yeah.
Right.
And I like how you highlighted, the understanding and knowing why and that purpose, because we understand why we're changing. We can mitigate a lot of that resistance, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because,
Like,
Craig's upset because, I've been doing this for 20 years, and if I don't explain to him why we're changing, why we're going to this new process or this new equipment, he's going to be extremely resistant.
yeah.
But once there's a level of understanding, I think that is a huge piece of mitigating that resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the Army, right, in the operations order, it is paragraph 1.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
paragraph 1 is the situation paragraph. It tells you all the things that are going on. And then the rest of the order is about how you're going to get to affecting that situation, right? So
Yeah.
everybody has an understanding of why we're doing this change, this operation in the first place. And then the rest gets to the specifics of why and how. But a baseline understanding, right? Then you have to communicate, because if you just make change, tell everybody the change without giving them the why, then they're less likely to buy in, which I think we've talked about before.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons communication is so important, is with all this stuff. If I can't clearly articulate the situation that the organization's in, from the business aspect of like, well, what is the market conditions? Market conditions are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And I think something that recently we have all experienced is the increase in artificial intelligence, or, multi-language models, whatever you want to call it. But I think that the increase of AI, there is that, hey, we're going to start using this tool, and here's why. Because it's not going to necessarily replace jobs and people, but it's people that use that new tool will replace the people who do not use that tool.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the tractor example. Tractors did not replace farmers, but farmers with tractors did replace people who were farming without tractors because it's more efficient. The market changed, and the expectations of what you could bring to, the farmer's stand, the expectations changed. And so I think that, understanding that situation that the organization finds itself in, and the leader be able to, and it requires a little bit of vision sometimes from that leader, and that to have that foresight that you talked about, and then to really be able to make sure that the entire organization is on the same page, as being communicated across the board, and not just the other leaders in the organization understand the situation, but you want it all the way down to the new guy that started yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think, why are some organizations better than others? I think those, two things really, the acceptance of change and the communication of it, do those two things, right? And you're well ahead of anybody else, right? And so many organizations, like you said, are kind of resistant to change. But so to give you another example, a friend of ours owned a beach chair service down in coastal Alabama. And this is a well-established business industry down there. So to add a little more clarity to that, in front of the condos on the beach in coastal Alabama, there's the beach chairs, right? Those beach chairs are owned by separate independent companies, not the unit you were staying in, not the hotel you were staying in, but an independent company. And a friend of ours owned a company that provided those chairs, right? Well, so in coastal Alabama, there's sea turtles that come on shore and lay the eggs, right? And so there's laws down there to protect the sea turtles and things like that. Well, they passed a new law that all the chairs had to be removed off the beach at night to allow the sea turtles to come and nest. And our friend was pretty resistant. Like many, all of the organizations down there were resistant to that law, and they were trying to repeal it. And they were trying to go to all of the town meetings and things to fight against it and everything. And some of these companies are much bigger, have several properties whereas our friend only had like one or two, right? So it was smaller, fewer chairs to deal with. And I was sort of thinking, it's like, oh, okay, you could go and try and fight it before the law takes into effect, right? Or you, as a smaller company, could go ahead and change to smaller, easier, lighter chairs.
Yeah.
So that they're easy to get on and off at night, and in the morning. And you could also start marketing that to other customers, right? Hey, we have turtle-friendly chairs.
Right.
Right? I mean, think about the market. The marketing writes itself, right?
Yeah.
But they were so resistant to change, right? No, it's going to take, we have all these heavy chairs. We're going to replace all our old chairs because these laws are changing. We need to get the law changed. No, the law's changed. So you can continue to fight against it, or you can go ahead and accept it, figure out how to affect that change.
Yeah.
And then move forward ahead of your competitors.
Yeah. To me, that sounds like, the ability of the leader to look at a scenario or that situation and then assess the risk versus the opportunity.
Yeah, great.
Because that, in that scenario, everybody, it sounds like, was focused on the risk to their business.
Yes.
Everybody was worried about, man, this is going to increase my labor. This is going to increase this. It's going to be more difficult. I've got more time involved with this. And really, I think as leaders, if we can look at that and say, okay, but what's the opportunity?
Yeah.
What can we do to pivot at this moment and become, successful? And not that, we want to take over the entire coastline, but maybe we want to expand, and instead of have 2 to 3 locations, we want to go up to about 5. Well, a good way to do that is to be more agile. And when you can adapt and change quickly, I think that there is there's an advantage there. And like you said, it's usually the smaller organizations that have that ability.
Yeah.
Large corporations, there's good and there's pros and cons to being that big, to where it takes a long time to turn that ship around.
Yeah.
It's a significant activity. It's not, a few people making a decision. There's processes, and you got to get it up to the board of directors, and you got to do a lot of stuff. But with a smaller organization that can be agile, I think there's a lot of times opportunity that we miss because we're too focused on the risk. And we have to be confident as leaders to make that change sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing that always comes to mind when I think back through organizations that I've seen, the ones that are good at change, the ones that struggle with it sometimes, is it helps as a leader if you have built a foundation of trust throughout your team, so that when you appear to be doing something crazy, adjusting to the market, because maybe your employees have not heard about this market change. They're not aware of how involved this new technology is. And you show up talking about you're going to totally redo how things happen, totally new process, totally new software on your computers. Maybe there has to be a level of trust for people to really even listen to your communication, because people will resist even good communication that's being articulated from the leader if they don't trust them. And that's something that we can't do in one day.
Right.
And I think, that's why you'll hear throughout our conversations this common thread of you've got to build trust, is because it's so important to all aspects of leadership. And if you have built that good foundation, when you do show up one morning and you're explaining to the team what may sound like a crazy idea, they're more likely to be like, we'll hear you out on this at least. And I'm not saying they're not going to resist if they trust you. I'm just saying it's going to be easier to manage.
Yeah, you're right, man. So what are some things leaders can do to affect change, right? You foresee and communicate, right? And trust, right? Okay, well, and to get the trust. So if you're somebody that's just taken over an organization, and you have to change something quickly, right? Not something you necessarily have mandated, but has come down from higher or something like that. Like leadership is a contact sport, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to go down and first kind of just socialize with your employees, right? And talk to them, give them time to speak, and you listen, and then you can communicate, the change. Hey, I know it's going to be frustrating. There's going to be probably some mistakes made at first, but we'll figure it out. We'll get through it, and we'll get to a better place on the other side, right? So it's not just an email. Hey, we're going left instead of right. You have to go talk to them.
Yeah. And I think it's valuable, in communication. We talk about how presence is a form of communication, and going down there on the production line and talking with the individuals who are going to be using this new equipment, or the ones that are most affected by this change.
Yeah.
To go down there and have that conversation with them is going to go leaps and bounds towards helping mitigate their resistance, as well as them providing you some more information to make sure that, maybe we are making the right decisions.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we forget that, everybody in our organization's an extra set of eyes and ears for the leadership, but we got to go and ask their opinion. We got to go talk to them. We've got to go engage. I like the idea of leadership being a contact sport, because it is. I mean, and sometimes that is, I've got to go down here and talk with somebody. And sometimes that is now I've got to be the one to have these difficult conversations.
Yes. Yeah.
But we can get ahead of that a lot of times with effective communication.
What you're talking about really is an important part, right? Which is, you have to accept feedback too, right? And this in particular is, that way you can adjust smaller parts of the change to better affect it, right? Based on what they say, right? The feedback. But then also I think about times when change, the end state might be uncertain.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you have to change, but you don't know exactly what it's going to look like, you've got to go down and talk to the people, right? Talk to the employees, right? And say, hey, listen, we're going to change this thing up. I don't know exactly what the end is going to look like, but here's generally what we're thinking. When we do that, how would you want it to look, right? So you engage them, you get their feedback, right? And they might give you the high pitched, whoa, it might be a difficult conversation, but especially in times when things are difficult, when changes are difficult, and you don't know exactly what it's going to look like, communication and engagement becomes way more important. And transparency, right? Listen, I don't know what exactly we're going to wind up like, but we have to do this. Here's why. And here's where I want your feedback, right? I'm including you in this.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of leadership as a whole, is taking that feedback and getting that information from your entire team, because I think it provides it's value on so many different levels. As a leader, you're gaining more information so that you can, craft the right answer and craft the right decisions. But you're also getting that engagement to where now we don't have this perceived barrier between leadership and lower level team members. Because a lot of times, this is Craig's first day here, or my first few months, and no one's ever talked to me other than my first line supervisor, I feel detached. But the more engagement an individual has with senior leaders, they're going to feel like they're valued as a member of the team, and that they're more likely to speak up and say something. Because a lot of times it's not the visionary leader who realizes that there needs to be a change. A lot of times it comes from the front line. But if you don't have that trust built, are they really going to speak up and tell somebody? I don't think they are, because they're not going to think you care what their opinion is. If you've never asked it before, why do they think that you care? And I'm not saying that all the senior leaders have to be on the production floor every day, just chatting people up, conversations. But there needs to be I think, a deliberate plan of how often do you engage your team members. And there's no one size fits all answer for that. That depends on, the size of your company, how it works, and things like that. But I think the more engaged leaders can be with their entire team, it shows that their opinions are valued, because maybe it's actually one of my frontline supervisors who's at a trade show and finds some new technology that would significantly increase our production rate or save us a lot of money.
Yeah.
I want them to come back and tell me. I don't want them to just be like, that was cool, and keep going.
Yeah. Then after
I
it
want
hits the
somebody to
market
come.
and you're playing catch up, they're like, oh yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Well, come on, man. Like,
Yeah.
you're part of this too.
Yeah. But I think to really get that feedback, a lot of times it goes back to, do they trust you? Because maybe that technology is going to replace the machine that I've been running for 20 years. I've got to trust you're not just going to fire me when you buy the robot.
Yeah.
I've got to trust that you're going to find some other, maybe you retrain me to, program the robot. But we've got to, as leaders, keep an eye on that, because with change, sometimes it's a self-preservation technique. People just want to make sure they're not losing their job.
Yeah. So, in the Army, a couple of years ago, I was part of restructuring a medical brigade. So really, when it comes to the field hospitals, that's the part that we were working on. And they had, it was standard across the Army, the organization, you had, I think it was 3 different field hospitals with so many beds each. Everyone in the Army, every medical brigade in the Army was changing to this new structure that provide 2 higher capacity, more mobile field hospitals, right? So higher capacity, I mean more hospital beds, but they would be more adaptable to the changing field conditions. And so, like, we had to go to the employees, right? And talk to them about why this massive change was going on. Well, because this is going to be much better if we get into a larger competition, right? A larger war. But ultimately, when I got down to some of the most junior soldiers, right, that were running those beds, right, I kind of explained to them, hey, this is a big change that's going to go on. I know the name of your organization might change, your leader, your direct line supervisor might change, but ultimately, you are still responsible for this bed. Yeah. This bed just may go somewhere else, and you'll go with it, and you'll be doing the same things you're doing now, just there. But this is so we can organize a little better and be better prepared for high intensity operations. Right. So going down and explaining, how technically and tactically, each little movement goes to those people that are affected by it is important to get that trust, right? That's part of the communication. Now I had to bring it back to my beach chair example, right? Okay, listen, I need next week, instead of going to the beach and sitting on a chair and monitoring all of our beach chairs out there and signing people up, I need you to come to our house, because we're going to be using saws and paintbrushes to create new chairs.
Yeah.
Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
Well, because this new law passed, we need faster, lighter chairs. And here's what's going to affect you. Like when you show up in the morning and you have to sit out all those beach chairs, they're going to be lighter. Yes. After that, everything else remains the same. So you're still going to sit there from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The price isn't going to be the same. Everything's going to be the same, except these chairs are going to be lighter for you. Just next week, we're taking a week off to do this instead of go sit down on the beach, right? And so that way, that employee understands that there is going to be a change, and ultimately, it's going to be better for them. But what they're doing may not change all that much, so it's going to be okay. That reduces the stress level, the apprehension, the anxiety over the change some, which should reduce the resistance to it.
Yeah, I remember being in the Army making the joke, you can either tell us the truth or we'll make up our own. And it was so true, because if you were left wondering about what leadership was going to do or what they were planning on, the rumor mill will just start creating something. And then you've got, you don't want to be fighting that as a leader. You don't want people out there making up their own truths.
Yeah.
And it's tough sometimes with a lot of change. And the one example I'll share is when right before I left the Army, it was a restructuring, and our battalion was being relocated to another brigade because the brigade that we fell under was being closed down. And it was basically our rival brigade. And so, there's always a lot of what we'll call healthy competition in the Army. And so when we received the word that that's where we were going, our infantry battalion was moving over to a different brigade, there was a lot of resistance. There was people like, absolutely not, we're not doing this. And it's like, well, we kind of have to, the Army said. Yeah. And it took a lot of communication. And what I learned is not everybody accepts change at the same timeline. I had some people that the first time we explained why, they were on board. And I had some people, 60 days later, still against it. I mean, and they were already in the new brigade. They were wearing the new insignia, and they were still not happy about it. And so it takes time, and there's got to be a deliberate effort, because we were not just changing units, we were changing geographic locations. We had to move all of our stuff, and it is a deliberate process. And you have to, I feel like you've also got to kind of give some grace to the people that you're working with, because humans naturally resist change. Yeah. And they're going to naturally be resistant. And so it's not that they're against you. It's not that they're trying to be problematic. It's just going to take some people a little bit more time to work through that issue than others. And it is in that scenario, it would almost be like if you took a department out of Coca-Cola and told them next week they're going to start working for Pepsi.
Oh gosh.
That's what it felt like to us. And it was like, no, we're not doing that. But that's what it was. But again, if you have faced some big significant change like that, I think it becomes easier the more you do it. So the more an organization changes, you get used to adapting to the market and the scenario. Next time you do it, it's not going to be as bad as the first time. Yeah. And so you can build a culture inside of your organization that is more resilient to change.
Yeah. So kind of one of the last things I want to talk about is what you just mentioned, right? Or similar to that is having difficult conversations. Kind of when you don't know exactly where you're going for a change, but a change has been directed, right? And it is not something that's going to help the organization, but you have to do it, right? Like you said, you were still the same battalion. You were just working for somebody else, but y'all hated it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, so if difficult situations come up where, ultimately in the business, because of this restructuring, some people are going to have to leave the company. Yes, those are going to be difficult conversations, but as a leader, right, it's something you're going to have to do. Go down and talk to the employees and engage them and be completely transparent about the whole thing. Because if you don't, there's going to be more resistance, much more frustration, and unnecessary frustration and anger over the change, right? Hey, listen, either the market has changed, or we're not as successful as we thought we would be, or something like that, right? Or we're because of taxes, we're moving from California to Texas or whatever. I'm just making that part up. But having the difficult conversations like, listen, we have to change. This is what we have to do. And unfortunately, if you want to continue to be a part of this organization, then you're going to have to come with us, or we're going to have to let you go. Yeah. And that's a very hard thing to do, especially if you work with these people for a long time, or they have worked there for a long time. There's going to be a lot of resistance, but that's your responsibility as a leader, right? You can't just shoot an email to them and say, hey, oh, by the way, you're not coming with us anymore.
Yeah, I think as leaders, we owe that to them, that communication. If we've built up this trust, and I think even in those examples, even people that you are either disciplining, or even letting go, like the way you behave will either build or erode trust. Because what we don't know is 5 years down the road, both of you may be working in different positions and you may end up working with each other again. And so how you behave in that scenario is still going to affect your ability to lead, maybe not that team, but a different team in the future.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You don't want to leave any bad blood between you, right? It
There's
may
no
be
need.
difficult.
There's no value there.
Yeah. You're making people's lives difficult unnecessarily, and it could come back because just like you said, the market may change again, or the needs of the organization might change again, and you may have that position open again, or maybe they get fine and they go and often create a startup that fulfills the exact need. Like, oh gosh, we need that. Can we hire you back?
Yeah.
So change can be easy, change can be difficult, but either way, the leader has to be a very big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Understanding, communicating, and engaging, right?
Yeah. I think that it's a deep topic, and I'm sure we'll revisit some change in a later episode as well. Leadership is definitely involved in a requirement for change management.
As always, take these lessons, use them, and spread them. Everyone is welcome in the cohort.
Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe for more, and drop us a line at commandpostcohort.com to request a specific topic.
We'll see you next time on the cohort.